Okay, hello. Good morning. Dog morning to you, as Charlie might say. I don't know if you can see him, but he's back there beeping. I know. We're gonna go to the dog park. There's a whole Charlie language and syntax that Susie and I have come up with. I mean, it varies a lot, but it involves mispronouncing a lot of things, and the dog park is the parp, with a P. 2 P's. Anyway, hi. So we had a really lovely weekend down in Amador County, which is about an hour and a half south of here. Drinking some wine and looking at nature, and it was great. Charlie was sad because we left him at a sort of not a doggy daycare, but like a, dog. Well, they do daycare, but like an overnight dog camp. He got to hang out with a bunch of dog friends for a few days. So he was sad when we left, but then he kind of got into it and had a good time, and now he's really tired. We're going to go kind of a weird way today because I am going to go and get a COVID test, because that's just, we went somewhere else for the weekend, and so just to check that box and cover bases and, pick your other metaphor. Also, I'm very excited about this, but my dad is coming out here to visit this coming weekend. I haven't seen him in over a year, and he just got vaccinated. Well, not just at this point. It's been, I think, over a month since he got his second shot. So he's, his vaccine should be up to sort of full effectiveness at this point. So he's coming out from New York, which will be great. I haven't seen my dad in over a year. It'll be really nice to see him. But the COVID test is also partially to make sure. I'm getting a regular test today and a rapid test tomorrow. Tomorrow's Wednesday. This is probably going to go up on Wednesday, so for you it's today. But anyway, he flies in on Thursday. I'm just trying to make sure that, we don't have, even though he's vaccinated, we don't want to sort of push the effectiveness of the vaccine, and I really don't want to kill my dad. So sometimes I totally want to kill him, but I don't literally want to kill him. So currently on the way, Charlie is going to be very sad when he finds out that we have to stop for 5 minutes to get a COVID test, but he'll deal. Anyway, so something I wanted to sort of talk about a little today. There is a lot of, there's a lot of conflict is probably the right word for it in the world right now, including, it's sort of everywhere, but it's also very much here in the U.S. where I live. I'm going to go this way so I don't have to get stuck behind all those cars. There's a lot of conflict. That there is racial tension, and there is gender inequity, and there is gender identity conflict. There are all of these different dimensions, and there is anti-Semitism as as a person of at least Jewish ethnicity. That's not a thing that I should leave unmentioned. There's also anti-Islamism, and I'm sure there is also anti-Christianity in places, although it's so something that I'm going to talk about here for a moment. I think will sort of help explore my feelings on that a little bit. I think there's a fair question that is, given the number of straight white dudes we have in the media space, why am I, a straight white dude, putting this channel out there and putting my voice out into the world and thinking that anyone needs to hear anything from me right now, which is a completely fair question. And there are a couple things. One is, my voice is all I have, right? I can elevate other people's voices, and I think if this channel gets to a point where I can pay other people to help out and give other people a platform, I absolutely want to do that, and that's certainly part of the plan. But here at the outset, it's just me, and it's just going to be me until it's not. And so all I have is my voice. But there is an element to which, well, there are a couple things. So this is sort of what I was about to say about like anti-Christianity. I will just admit that like that is not a thing that I like see a lot of personally, but I also take people at their word when they experience things. And I also think that generally speaking, we sort of tend to view any form of like bigotry and hatred as being its own thing, and they're really all bound up together. They're all sort of different manifestations of the same underlying I don't even want to say problem, but like tendency of humans towards drawing boundaries between ourselves and other people, and sort of viewing things in terms of us and them. And so as a straight white man who, grew up, as I've mentioned, with kind of an aristocratic background, right? Like, I think I've said this before, but like we didn't have enough money to do literally everything, but like our choices were not severely constrained in the way that I think most people are. I went to private school from third grade through the end of undergrad, and I did 5 years of undergrad because that it's a longer story, but like, none of this was a problem. And meanwhile, most of the country these days has to make really, really hard choices based on money between like, putting food on the table and getting treatment for a serious medical condition. And those are the kinds of choices that I don't think people should have to face. But so why another straight white dude? Most of the other straight white dudes out there who have channels like this spend a lot of time talking about their own grievance and sort of how, the world isn't treating them as being as great as they think they are. And I think that's a load of nonsense. It's a bunch of malarkey. I know, Charlie. One thing about being a like non-threatening, well-funded straight white dude is that I have been able to move through the world without a whole lot of, no one sees me walking up and says, "Here comes trouble," right? For the most part, I walk in and I'm smiling, and I, have this big bushy beard. I mean, I didn't always, but I still always had the same face, and I'm not very tall, and I'm kind of pudgy, and so I walk up and people are like, "Oh, you seem like you're not going to hurt me. Let's interact." And I think, from that perspective, I think I have a decent vantage point on the entire system and the way that all of these things are connected to each other. And I think the thing that makes that easiest for me is that I haven't had a lot of people making me feel unsafe for who I am. And I think about it a lot in terms of, what our brains are doing fundamentally at any given time is just trying to survive. And if we feel like there is a thing that urgently needs our attention to ensure our survival, say there is, bigotry where or it doesn't even have to be bigotry, any force that is outside of us that we think is threatening our lives, our peace, our well-being, our brain wants to devote, understandably, our brain devotes all of its attention and energy to sort of fighting that one particular problem, or even if it's sort of a constellation of problems, that's where our attention goes. And I don't, it's an incredible privilege, but like I don't really have any major threats to me at any given time. I mean, anti-Semitism is sort of there lingering in the background, and there are plenty of people in both the world and in America today who think that like Jews are a secret cabal, like getting together to plan the media or something. I don't know. We're not. we have enough trouble. Someone once said to me, it's hard enough to get two Jews to agree on what to order for dinner. I'm not sure how you think you can get us all to agree on how to control the media. But, it's an appealing narrative, and it's an old narrative. And if you're feeling unhappy with your life, our natural instinct and the way our brain is wired is to try to find someone to blame. And so because I'm in this position where I don't really have these active threats to my well-being, I can also sort of step back and see the way in which blaming any one person for these large systemic problems is not a solution to the problem. And for the most part, the people who sort of engage and perpetuate these problems are doing so because they don't, their world has sort of put them in a position where they have come to believe that what they are doing is the good and just thing to do. And so if someone sees themselves as on the side of truth and justice and right, the solution is not to, if you condemn them and say, no, you're evil, you're evil, you're evil, they're just going to think like, well, no, I'm not. And they'll get stronger in that belief. And the only way that our brains can overcome, so I mentioned the survival instinct, and that's really built into our brains for pretty obvious reasons, right? Just like evolutionarily, if you don't have a survival instinct, you won't survive. But the problem is we get a lot of false positives, right? Like people have sort of, you probably know the idea of like a COVID test telling you have COVID if you don't. I mean, false negatives with COVID tests are more common, where it tells you you don't, but it turns out you actually do, and it's just not presenting. But that's, but hopefully people understand false positives and false negatives. If not, that's a thing I can elaborate on at some point. But our brain is the decision-making system in our brain that says, am I currently threatened, is wired to be overly sensitive to the possibility of threat, which means more false positives than more false negatives. That's just a fact of the way that our brains are wired, and it's natural, right? It's not a bad thing, but it does lead us to react very strongly to anything that sort of triggers the part of our brain that says, oh, I need to go into defense mode. And so, being in my position where I don't have as much of that, I can sort of step back and see all of these people, everyone thinks that they are defending themselves against everyone else. And that's not to say that everyone is wrong, right? A lot of people are right. Racism is very real. I know from my grandmother's experience in the Nazi concentration camps that anti-Semitism can be extremely real and extremely can be a force for doing a lot of harm. So it's not to dismiss any of these underlying threats as fake. But the thing that's really complicated is the way that our brains are wired when we see a threat is with defensiveness. If you're threatened by a tiger or whatever, I think I go this way, then your brain is going to be kill the tiger. And so if you're threatened by someone from a different tribe, your brain is going to say, destroy this person. And the problem is, we are not in, there's more to our lives than just these isolated one-on-one interactions. We have, there's an entire ecosystem of humanity. I said something to Susie recently where it's if you drill down, it's just webs on webs on webs, or webs within webs within webs, right? Sure, you have a connection to one person, but they have, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of connections to other people, and so do you. And so, if you kill someone in self-defense, well, there are still a lot of people who are going to be really negatively affected by that, who had nothing to do with it, and you're just like increasing the amount of pain and suffering in the world. This, unfortunately, is where we're going to pause, because I just got to my COVID test. Charlie has a lot of feelings because he knows we're not at the dog park and he doesn't know what's going on. Anyway, I'll be back in a Charlie, which is Charlie's unit of time. It is a unit of time. There's no consistency to it, so it's just a vague. I'll be back in a Charlie. Okay, bye. Okay, hi. Yes, I know, Beeps. I know. I love you. You're okay. Okay. Well, that was good. That was in and out in much less than 5 minutes, like 3 minutes. It's nice to be out in the country sometimes. Just a lot fewer people around, which for an introvert like me is just lovely. It's a thing I appreciate very, very much. Okay, so I was talking about the ecosystem of human interaction, and so something that I think is really hard is we have a lot of conflict, and we can't just ignore it or pretend it's not there or dismiss it, right? Like, feelings are valid. If someone feels hurt, then their feelings are valid. But the solution isn't, we have been sort of trained by, conditioned is maybe even a better word for the psychologists out there, but we've been trained by our society, our environment, our both academic and financial, like economic systems. We have been trained to think that the way to resolve conflict is to fight it out, and whoever wins the fight wins the conflict. And that is incredibly unhealthy, and it doesn't actually resolve the underlying conflict ever. Something I've now been married for 2.5 years, and we have all kinds of conflict, and sometimes it's bigger and sometimes it's smaller. But if all I did was shout down my wife and tell her I think she's wrong when my feelings are hurt, then all that would do is hurt her feelings, and she wouldn't understand what hurt my feelings, and vice versa. And we have gotten pretty good at like communicating. There's sort of a classic style of like, when you do X, it makes me feel Y. Also, I hope people are okay with variables. I'm a math nerd, so I will often throw a lot of like random letters at you to represent something that could be anything. But we don't resolve our conflict by trying to win the fight. We resolve our conflict by trying to understand each other, and by trying, and it goes both ways, right? It's not just understanding each other. It's both making ourselves understood and being able to listen to someone else. And that is a really, really hard thing to do in the current environment. I mean, it's hard enough in a marriage. So think about how much harder it is on Twitter with an anonymous, someone with like a bunch of numbers in their handle. When they say something that really, really hurts you, it takes so much emotional energy to sit there and say, you're not understanding. I don't think I'm like communicating myself clearly. Here's what I'm feeling. I understand that you feel X. And it's also really hard because, I think there is a difference. There's sort of a common phrase, there are two sides to every story, and I think that is something that is both broadly true and also is like often applied incorrectly, right? Like there are two experiences for every interaction, right? Like each of the two people who are interacting have their own experience, and it's not right to say that one experience is true and one experience is false. But one thing that our society also encourages us to do, and this is part of the way that we like have this tendency to resolve conflict through fighting, and through superiority and asserting dominance and all of that nonsense, is we fight over the narrative, right? And so it is true that two different people in an interaction or in a conflict will have their own experiences and perspectives. But what we often do is fight over which narrative is true. This person's narrative is true. The one person says, I don't know, look, a really common thing in our society is like a woman makes an accusation of some kind of sexual misconduct against a man, and the fight becomes, did it happen, did it not? And from my own experience, what I will say is that often we straight men in this society are so conditioned to think of women as I mean, not even necessarily our property, though sometimes as our property, but as a game, right? Like it is our goal to get whatever sex or sexual interaction we want out of a woman, and it is their job to resist, and so it is our job to break down those defenses. I'm not saying that's true. It's not the way things should be. It does a lot of harm. And it's taken me a long time to learn to not do it, but it is a huge part of our culture, is that perspective. And so it's often the case, I think it is the case in my experience, that that men will do things that are really hurtful to women without realizing that they're doing it. And it is also the case in my experience that, and I'm not saying that like if someone does something terrible to you, it is your job to talk to them calmly about it. I don't think that's the case either. But, we tend to fight over, like, this person's narrative is true, no, this person's narrative is true. And narratives are not truth regardless. Experiences are true. And so we need to... It's really hard, but I think it's really important for all of us to try to practice being better at communicating our own experiences and our own feelings, and to learn to listen to other people. And again, I think a lot of people, there's a tendency to take good ideas. I know, Charlie. I'm trying to wrap this up, pal. There's something I said to a friend last night is that good ideas are really often used to disempower people. And I don't think you can do that with a bad idea. And so you take a good idea, like we should try to listen to each other more, we should try to communicate better. And that is often used to say, like, well, your pain, I know you feel bad about being hurt or assaulted or abused in whatever way, but you should try to, you need to empathize with the person who did that to you, and that's not what I'm saying, right? It's not your responsibility to care for someone else, but I think there is a lot of room for growth for all of us if we can try to practice that where possible, and also recognizing that it's not always possible. So if someone tells you to listen to this, and they're going to tell you that I'm saying you need to, shut up and get over it, that's not what I'm saying. It's really hard to process things that hurt us, and that other people do to us. And again, like, my place in the world has made it much easier for me to do that, because it's given me there's a lot of personal stuff I've had to process, but I have had to process far less systemic pain than other people. I mean, it's sort of, in my family, it's like gone through, it was really true for my grandmother, but like these things have been very personal and very attached to specific people for me, in a way that they're not for everyone. And so I understand that other people's experiences are different. But I am trying to find, I want to live in a better world, in a world where no one has to deal with any kind of bigotry or oppression, and we have the resources to do it, but there are a lot of human tendencies that stand in our way, and so that's sort of what I'm trying to talk about here, because that is the piece I think I can contribute, and that is the thing that I think distinguishes me a bit from a lot of the other people who look like me on the internet. We're going to stop there because we're at the dog park, and as you can tell, Charlie is very excited to get out there. But we'll pick up on the way back with talking about the world that we can have, the good world. That's the name of the show. Yeah, I'll talk to you soon. Beeps. Okay, Beeps. I know. I know. I'm so sorry. I made you wait so long. Yeah, come on. Okay, there you go. Hi, just a quick reminder from here at the dog park to please click like and subscribe and share this and comment and do the things you know how to do, because that's how this can be a thing that I can do all the time. I mean, I guess it is, but long term would be really nice. I would like that, and hopefully you would too. If you wouldn't, don't click like or subscribe. But if you do like this, please continue to like it and like it. Okay, thank you. Okay, hi. We are leaving the dog park. Charlie is happily lying down. He had a really nice time catching up with his friends. We haven't been here in a few days because I was out of town. Charlie was at doggy camp, so he's very excited to get to play with his pals again. Picking up. I mean, I do want to continue talking about the good world, but I was just sort of thinking about on the way out here, or on the way out of the dog park to the car. A thing that I think is worth explaining, given the moment in time. You have not seen me wearing a mask, I think, at all on this show, but I do anytime I go into anywhere or have close interaction with anyone. What's nice about the dog park out here is that it's 2 acres and it's really big, and there's just enough room to keep a good distance from other people. So I mostly, sometimes when there are folks who sort of seem like they might be at higher risk, and when especially if there are other people wearing masks, I will usually bring the mask, and I'll sometimes put it on. But anyway, that's what that's about. But I was also thinking about, I had this sort of imagined reaction from a hypothetical commenter, which is reflective of a thing that I see a lot, which is the idea of a thing that we say a lot to each other when we don't like someone else's behavior is, you should be ashamed, right? You should be ashamed of yourself. And the thing about shame is that it is powerful, but it's a weapon. It's not shame is not, it's not an ingredient for building yourself up, right? It's not if you think of I guess I mean material, not ingredient, but if you think of building a house, you have bricks and mortar and lumber and whatever else is going into a house, and shame is like dynamite, right? And you can tell someone else to dynamite their house, but that's not really gonna help them have a good place to live. And even if it's an eyesore, or if the house is let's say the house is, I don't know, I'm gonna torture this metaphor. A thing I said to a friend last night is metaphors are the only thing that it's actually good to torture. I'll torture this metaphor a little. Let's say there's a house in my neighborhood that is just using, let's say it's just using all of the energy that the power company allocates to the neighborhood, and somehow as a result everyone else has a brownout. Demanding that someone dynamite the house is not the same as talking to them about ways to address this issue. It's just blowing someone else up because of their problem. And so it's not to say that when we say to someone, you should be ashamed of yourself, or shame on you, or whatever, the underlying problem that we're talking about is generally real. But encouraging shame does not, it tends to make things worse. And a lot of the the worst behaviors that we are capable of come out of a sense of shame and a sense of worthlessness. So part of what I am trying to encourage here, and again, it's a lot easier for me because I don't feel threatened by a lot of the people that I interact with, because they don't feel threatened by me. But you know, just shaming people is not going to be a way to make things better. I mean, a really good example of the power of shame is that after World War I, the German people were, dealing with the collapse of an empire and the aftermath of a horribly violent, brutal, deadly, awful war that they, didn't even get to say, like, at least if you win the awful war, you can tell yourself it was worth it. But if you lose the awful war, then it's just, it becomes really clear how wasteful and just how much pain is produced by all of that violence. And Germany also there was like lots of hyperinflation, so their economy tanked. And so there was just a lot of shame attached to being German. And those are the conditions in which someone like a Hitler can arise, right? When people feel shame, they look for someone who will make them feel better. And those are the circumstances in which we tend to be sort of most susceptible to becoming violent, to becoming hateful, is when we feel shame and it's shame and blame, right? We feel shame, we blame someone else, and then we take our shame out on someone else. And that doesn't solve anything. And so shaming people is a really counterproductive way to try to make things better. And so that's just a thing I was thinking about, and I wanted to sort of lead. I wanted to mention that as a lead into talking about the good world, because I think, we exist. What's really hard is that we exist within this giant, like, social, emotional ecosystem where all of us are interacting with each other all the time, and all of those interactions produce feelings in us, they produce feelings in other people, and our feelings are just based on how our brains are wired, our feelings are the things that drive a lot of our actual actions. There's a bit of a tangent, but there's some good social science. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, whose work on behavioral economics won a Nobel Prize, which I know the economics Nobel Prize is like not officially a Nobel Prize, but whatever. They did good research on like psychology and economics. They refer to the brain as operating in System 1 and System 2. And System 1 is like your gut reactions, and System 2 is your rational thought process. And the order, that's the order for a reason, because System 1 is the one that kicks in first. But a thing that I think we all have a really hard time recognizing is that even when we think we're working with System 2, we're actually very often, because our brains are just trying to conserve energy and not trying to think too hard, what we will often do is act out our feelings and then come up with a rational justification for it. And so pretty much anytime anyone is saying, it's okay for me to hurt this person because of X, usually X is because I was hurt by them or by someone like them. That's just our brain coming up with a justification for the feelings that we don't know how to process. And so to make the world better, we can't just leave the pain that we feel. We can't ignore it, because it will cause us to lash out and to continue hurting each other. But it's also really important to recognize that when we lash out at each other, even if we can come up with a justification for it, it's ultimately doing harm on a small level, but it's also doing bigger harm on levels that we don't have the ability to see, right? Like, if you shame someone, you don't see what happens to that shame and what they do downstream. And it feels like the right thing to do, but it's ultimately going to have, in any war, when there is violence, there are just a lot of like downstream negative consequences, and that's what happens even with really small amounts of emotional violence that we enact on each other, that we don't even necessarily think of as emotional violence. We tend to think of them as justice, and that's part of the problem. So the good world is it's the term that I use for a really old idea, which is just the idea of a world where we get to live in peace, and we get to enjoy the bounty of wonder all around us. Because I've said this before, but the world is bottomlessly amazing if we have both the capacity and the means and the support to engage with it. And all of those things are important, right? None of us can do it on our own. I certainly can't, and I am at this place in my life because of, yes, a lot of work on I've done a lot of work on myself, but with my therapist, who has given me a lot of help, and also I've had a lot of love and support from my wife and my family. I was waving at the waving guy. One day maybe I'll stop and talk to him and find out his name. Anyway, so the good world, there are, you can find this idea all over the place, right? It's also the idea of utopia. Martin Luther King talked about it a lot. I believe it's the same thing he was referring to. He talked about the beloved community, which is, he talks about the world where people are judged not by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. I think my version is we don't judge anyone, and we just help them improve the content of their character, because the content of their character doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from a lot of systems that are much bigger than any individual. And so the good world is one where we all learn to understand each other and to support each other. It's taking the kind of relationship that I have with Susie, where yes, there is conflict sometimes, but we try to understand each other, we try to communicate, we try to work through our conflict in a productive way, rather than launching emotional bombs at each other, or actual bombs at each other, because conflict can be resolved that way. It's harder, and it takes more energy, and it doesn't feel as good as, lashing out at someone feels good. That's the reason we do it, because our brains are wired to have that feel good. But ultimately, it doesn't make the world better. It just increases the level of anger and violence in the world. And so the good world is one where we have the emotional space and the emotional freedom and the economic freedom and the physical freedom to work through the things that need working through, instead of having to constantly feel like we're in survival mode. And this world is possible, and the reason I know that it's possible is because I am fortunate enough to live in it. Again, non-threatening white dude, I get extended these things without trying, and that's really nice for me, but it's also what everyone else deserves. Everyone deserves to live like I live, and frankly, the world would be much better. And on the economic side, again, there are sort of obviously different levels of what is possible, but we have enough collective wealth to meet everyone's basic needs, so that people aren't struggling to survive, against poverty and hunger and homelessness and things like that. We could very easily meet those needs and still have a lot of money for a lot of people to be really rich. It would not be that hard. The main effect of all of the poverty we have is to trap a lot of people in wage slavery. It's not. I'm not going to weigh in on whether that's intentional, but it's certainly a major result. Is that we can get really cheap labor, and then someone else can get rich off of someone's cheap labor. We've moved beyond at least in the U.S., we've moved beyond like chattel slavery and people being forcibly trapped into servitude, and we've moved to a system where we have some rationalizations, just as they did then, right? They had rationalizations about who was superior and who was inferior, and there were all kinds of rationalizations that slavery was a service being done for black folks by white folks. We can pretty easily look back now and see the horrible injustice and motivated reasoning of that. Motivated reasoning is a psychology term, but it basically means just telling yourself a story to justify the things that you're doing. And with big things we've inherited and injustices, like slavery in the past or like economic injustice today, we inherit these things, and to really engage with how cruel they are and how unjust they are is really hard for us. And so we come up with these narratives about, oh, those people are lazy, and if they worked harder, they would get out of that. And, meanwhile, we have these great industrialist leaders who are deserving of all of the wealth in the world and, unlimited power because they have done so much greatness for society. And I think we really underestimate how many of those poor wage workers, had they received the same investment as someone like me or a billionaire, they could have done a lot for society as well. And so the good world is a place where we sort of understand these things and learn to see how much the injustice in our world is inherited, so that we can work together against it, instead of fighting over legacy, instead of fighting over narrative, instead of fighting over who's good and who's bad and who deserves shame and who doesn't. We can just live together in peace and really enjoy and appreciate each other and all of the different things that each of us bring to the table, because all of us are unique and interesting in our own way and have our own thing that we bring. And it's really easy to dismiss that on the basis of these much larger systemic issues. And I think it's important to be able to see both. But it's really hard to see both unless the world gives you the support you need. And so, the good world is a world in which each of us is individually, I think we have to start with ourselves, right? You can't lead someone else to peace if you can't find it for yourself. And that's an ongoing process, right? I'm trying to lead people to peace, because I've gotten a lot better at finding it for myself, but I'm not perfect. I still mess up all the time, and sometimes I get snippy or whatever. But I'm trying, and I have a direction that I'm pointing. And so the thing with the good world is it's really hard, but it is possible. And it takes a bit of work from all of us. It takes setting aside our egos, because we really get defensive about the idea that we are right and someone else is wrong. And instead of thinking about things as being right or wrong, we have to think about things as sort of what is, what builds peace, what doesn't build peace, what builds violence. But all of this is doable. I have gone from a world in which I was determined to prove how right I was to a world in which I can see how sometimes I'm right and sometimes I'm wrong, and the bigger picture is so much more than me. Getting to the world is not just about doing the work ourselves, and it's certainly not about making other people do the work. It's also about supporting other people. And that means everyone, like blanket support for everyone to have just the basic resources to engage with the world on their own terms, instead of being forced into defensive mode and survival mode. Because right now we are just dealing with these massive, massive, ancient ricochets of, the pain of human beings, literally the pain of human beings thousands of years ago, passed on through generations, bounced off of other populations. And this pain is both population level and individual level, right? Anti-Semitism is a thing that has had a huge effect on Jews throughout the world, but also my grandmother had her family members murdered and had a lot of individual pain. And both of those things are there, and both of those things are real, and we can't ignore them, but we're not going to find a path to the good world if we keep taking our pain out on each other. The only thing that will ever make it better is us finding a way to really work towards healing, and to be patient with each other and to be compassionate with each other. And again, I'm not saying you're a bad person if you're not compassionate. I'm not saying it's your responsibility. I don't really believe at this point in good or bad people. I don't really believe in obligation. I think we have an opportunity in this life to make things a little better. And I think the more we can do for that, the more satisfied we will be and the better the world will be. And, you know, even if we can't get to the good world in my lifetime, first off, I do think it's possible. But I don't think it's easy, and I think it's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take a whole lot more than just me. But I do think it's possible. And if we get to that world in my lifetime, like, that's amazing. That's an amazing world to live in, where also our technology would be so much better. All of the things that are wondrous in our world could be better if there were more people who sort of had the freedom and power to engage with them and engage with things that they are interested in and passionate about and find their voice, instead of sort of being forced into a position where, for survival, they have to serve the needs of someone who has a lot of who has accumulated a lot of wealth and power, or in my case, inherited not necessarily a lot, but like far more than most people have. Anyway, so obviously we're home, but that's the good world, the beloved community utopia. It's also quite honestly what I think that Jesus was talking about when he talked about the kingdom of God. That's going to probably upset some people, and I'm sorry. And you know, I'm not Christian, so like don't think of that as interpreted within the lens of Christian thought. But you know, when you hear things like the kingdom of God is within you, the kingdom of God is already among you, that's how I feel about the good world, right? The good world is my life. It is here. It is here if we set aside our ego and our desire to fight each other and outrank each other and all of that. And you know, I don't want to sort of erase the theological aspects of what Jesus was talking about. I have, you know, evolving thoughts on theology that are different from his, and so I'm not trying to say this is what Jesus meant. But there's a whole lot of overlap between the idea of the kingdom of God, where we stop destroying God's children around us, and the good world, where we also stop destroying God's children around us. There's also a lot of Buddhism in this, and I've like gotten much more into, I mean, Buddha and Jesus are really two of my favorite philosophers at this point, and I've like gotten really interested in the things that both of them have had to say. But that's going to be a thing for another day, because as you can tell, since we've stopped, we're home. Charlie really wants to go inside and see Susie, and so we're gonna do that. I'm gonna bring him in. We'll do a little meditation, and then you can go on your way. But thank you for sharing your time with me this morning, and thank you for listening. And I hope you all have a splendid day. And I'll be back in a minute. Say goodbye to Charlie. Goodbye to Charlie. Yeah, it goes there. Yeah, I know. We're gonna go inside. Yes, yeah, here we are. Okay. Please like and subscribe. 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 I want to do a quick little intro again to talk about meditation. I mean, I've done this before, but it actually I think connects pretty nicely to this idea of the good world that I was just talking about. So I think it's worth making the connection here. I recorded a conversation at this point several months ago that I will post at some point. I've in sort of the run up to doing this channel, I wasn't really sure what to do, where to start, so I recorded some conversations with some friends, and I think they are interesting conversations, and I will post them at some point. I think I need to record an intro to them. It's probably a good idea to give a little context for like who the people are. But so that hasn't happened yet, but you'll get to see this conversation at some point is sort of what I'm getting at. But I had a conversation with Michelle Lee Weldon, who is she specializes in, I think she wears a lot of hats, and she even talks about that in the conversation, but she's a trained psychologist and specializes in like trauma and healing from trauma, and she does a good amount of coaching and stuff. Anyway, one of the things that she mentioned to me, so I had started meditating last year as a way of managing my own trauma that I've been recovering from, which is the thing I don't think I've talked about a whole lot on here yet, but I certainly will. But meditation is a good way to sort of both to bring yourself back to the moment and sort of escape these patterns that repeat in our brains, and it's also a good way to reinforce I can never remember which is the sympathetic nervous system and which is the parasympathetic nervous system. I love scientific jargon, but basically one of those is the thing that like gets you really worked up when you're really angry and on edge, and it's the fight or flight survival mode, like defensive. You know that feeling, I am sure, of like the adrenaline rush and like tensing up. I think that's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, whatever, jargon. The other part of our nervous system is the one that like relaxes and calms down and looks for peace. And so meditation is a really good way to reinforce that. But one of the things that Michelle taught me that I didn't know is that meditation also, in particular, strengthens the connections in your brain that enable you to see the world as, instead of just a competition between everyone for resources, as something where we're all in it together. And that is a thing that is, it's I'm sure people will disagree, but I feel very strongly that it's true in a pretty absolute sense. We are all in this together. We're all here. We won't survive if all we do is fight each other. And most of the problems we have are from the mindset that we need to fight each other. Because if you look around, resources are not actually that scarce. There's plenty to go around and plenty for people to have plenty on top of that. In terms of places to live, in terms of food, in terms of water, we may get in a direction where that changes, and certainly there are obviously complications when you deal with like different countries and different regions and things like that. But the world is a place with far more to offer than we can consume if we sort of go about it cooperatively and collaboratively. And I am a big believer in the power of cooperation and collaboration. Competition is, it's not without its purposes, but there's a reason, the one of the great, like, computer science competitions of, it's been a while at this point, it's more than 10 years ago, was the Netflix Prize, which you may have heard of, which was Netflix was trying to improve their algorithm, and they had really kind of hit a wall on how good their algorithm could be, and so they offered a prize. I think it was like $1 million to whoever improved their algorithm by a certain amount. And so a bunch of different computer science and data science teams set to work at it, and the team that ended up winning was a combination of the two teams that had sort of done the best. I believe that's the case. I know it was a combination of multiple teams that had been competing against each other. And I think that is such an instructive thing about how, competition can be useful, right? It gets you out of thinking the same thing as someone else, and it gives you an incentive, and there's value in that. But at the end of the day, the best work we can do is when we collaborate together, and when we bring the different things that different people have learned together into one really powerful base of knowledge. And so meditation reinforces the connections in your brain that enable you to see the world that way. And that is a hugely important part to reaching the good world. We cannot have the good world for everyone if we think that we need to fight each other to get there. If we're all going to torture another metaphor here, but if we're all on a riverfront, and the good world is on the other side of the river, and we're competing to build different bridges, and we keep sabotaging each other's bridges, and everyone's saying, no, we need to take my bridge, no, we need to take my bridge, instead of, this group saying, well, I learned that part of the river has this issue, and so, structurally what we need there is this, and another group saying, okay, that's good, because at the near edge, our approach works better, and just combining all of that knowledge and figuring it out, instead of blowing up each other's bridges and ensuring that no one ever gets anywhere. So practicing reinforcing the parts of our brains that enable us to be more cooperative, more collaborative, more patient with each other is a really important thing. It's a really important part of the process, and so that's why I've been practicing that, and that's why I would encourage you, whether it's meditation or something else, some kind of peaceful habit that you can practice devoting your attention to and put care into is going to be really useful. I find meditation very helpful. It's certainly not the only thing I do, but it's something I've started doing a lot, and I have gotten a lot of benefit from it, as has my marriage, so that's good. Okay, that's where we're gonna leave that today. Now I'm gonna do the actual meditation part, and then we'll talk a little more, and then we'll go our separate ways for the day. Okie dokie. Okay, I'm gonna go eat my sandwich. I messed up the timing of recording this. I recorded this after I recorded the meditation, so you'll hear about the sandwich after the meditation. Okay, bye. I figured out how to make it work. The countdown has started, and so soon we're going to get a bell, and then 10 minutes later we'll get another bell. So I will see you in a bit. go. The third bell. Sometimes it's like waking up in the morning. I do feel very refreshed, though. Apologies for... There was a surprise bell in there that you may have noticed. That's a phone iPad difference. You know, the Insight Timer app, which is the app that I use, has different settings, and so you can have, you know, different bells come up at different times. And so sometimes, especially when I do walking meditation, what I will often do is I'll have interval bells that just are, you know, it's if I'm walking for 20 minutes, it'll be every 5 minutes there's a middle bell. And that is, you know, it's not that important to me to necessarily keep track of time specifically, but it is helpful as a reminder, you know, if you're meditating and your mind wanders, it's nice to have the internal reminder, you know, where you sort of catch yourself when your mind wanders. But also a bell is a thing that reminds you, like, oh, I'm meditating. I'm not supposed to be thinking about, you know, the weather or whatever I'm thinking about. So that's what that surprise bell was. I'm sorry if that threw you. I imagine it may have. But hopefully, I don't know, the fact that it was a different tone made you helped you to figure out pretty quickly what was actually going on. Anyway, that was that. Okay, it's noontime here in Grass Valley, California, and I have a leftover sandwich. So yesterday, when we were coming back from our weekend away, we went into a little deli to get some lunch, and I got a turkey club, and I was really excited for that because I love a good turkey club. And Susie and I decided we would switch driving about halfway through the drive. And so we were looking for a place to pull over, and there was an Italian market, and they had chicken parm, and there are a few things I love more than chicken parm sandwiches. Also, let's be clear. I eat meat. I do struggle a little bit with both the sustainability aspect and I love animals, and so the idea of killing them and eating them is one that I struggle with. But I also, it's really delicious, and it is also the case that in the food chain in the world, there is a lot of animals being killed for sustenance, and so I at least I try to get my food from farms where it's done in a way that is not overtly cruel. I wish that our society made that choice more accessible to people, regardless of their level of wealth. It's a thing that's easier for me and Susie to do because it is more expensive, and that's messed up, and that's one of the many systems we need to fix. Anyway, that was a sidetrack from the Italian deli. So I had the turkey club, and I was getting all set to eat it, and we pull up at this Italian deli, and I'm like, oh my God, I love chicken parm. And so I decided that the turkey club I would set aside for what at the time was tomorrow, what is now today. When this posts, it will be yesterday. What is time? But anyway, I have a leftover sandwich that I haven't had a bite of yet. So that's going to be my lunch, so I'm going to go eat that. But I hope you all have an absolutely sparkling day, and hopefully I will see you again tomorrow. Okay, bye. Just going to give you a little extra bonus here, because this is what I found on the couch when I walked inside. Look at this goober. I know you're such a goober. Yeah. Say bye to everyone. Say goodbye, Charlie. Goodbye, Charlie.